G'day, this is a quick recap on how to make bread, sourdough or otherwise. So first of all, you need flour, more than this. You need half a kilo of flour. You can have it all white, or you can have it all wholemeal, or you can have it stone ground, or combinations thereof. The whiter it is, the easier the rise will be. And you need 500 grams of flour. You need to weigh it out, so you need a digital scale, or a scale. Digital is best. And you need some liquid. I use whey, which I make from when I make yogurt. It gives it a slightly more sour taste, and it's a way of getting rid of my whey. It needs to be tepid, and you need 325 grams, milliliters, same thing. And you can use water instead of whey, and you don't have to, just tap water will do. And then you need a teaspoon of salt. You put the flour and the whey together, or the liquid together. You mix it up. I use a KitchenAid mixer. I have done it with my hand. It just takes a little bit longer. And after you mix it, you let it sit for about half an hour. That makes sure that all of the water or liquid is absorbed by the flour. That's called autolyzing. Then you can add your salt, and either then or later you can add your yeast. Now this is sourdough starter. You don't have to use sourdough. You can use dry yeast. If you're going to use dry yeast, you need at least 2 teaspoons, possibly 2.5. And if you use sourdough starter, you can actually have a little bit of the dried yeast in there as well, especially if you're baking the non-white stuff, because that has the rise is a little bit more difficult. You need to, once you've got the yeast in, you need to keep beating the mixture until you get to the window test being passed. And the window test is basically where you wet your hands, you grab hold of the dough and you hold it up like that, and you should be able to see your finger behind it. You can either do that before you put the yeast in or after you put the yeast in, but it doesn't matter either way, except that there's a lot of liquid in your sourdough starter. That's going to affect the consistency of the dough thereafter. Then you put once it's passed the window test, you take the dough out, you put it onto the board, you dump it like that, and then you just roll it back like that, dump it and roll it back, so it's a nice ball with a nice tight dome structure on the top. A lot of tension on it. You bung it in a bowl, which you put a little bit of olive oil in, then you put some Glad wrap on the top. Now, if you really want to get the sourdough flavour out of it, you can put it in the fridge overnight. Otherwise, you leave it for about 3 hours to proof. You can tell it's finished proofing by poking at it, and if it leaves your fingerprint, but it starts to rise back a little bit slowly, you know that you've got it right. If it sits there without the indentation coming back, then you know that you've probably got it overproofed a bit. If it springs back straight away, you need to leave it in there for a little bit longer. Okay, so let's say you do it overnight in the fridge, take it out, and you need to warm it up again round about the 80-degree mark initially, and then leave it for a couple of hours until it has doubled in size in the bowl. Then you take it out of the bowl and you knock it back, which basically means you get the big bubbles out. So you bang it on the counter. Because you've had some olive oil on, it should be okay. It won't stick to anything. And then you just flatten it out. Put the corners into the middle, turn it over, roll it into a nice ball, and then want to use one of these, which you line with some parchment paper, cut it into strips, two big strips, big wide strips, one that way and one that way, bung down in the middle to stop it from sticking. You put your dough in here, put a tea towel on and let it sit for another hour or so, so that it rises back again, maybe half an hour. Then you put the oven on 450 Fahrenheit, put the top on it, that way up, and bake it for half an hour. The fact that you've got the top on and stuff means that it acts a bit like a Dutch oven. It keeps all the moisture in. What I then do is after half an hour, I take it out of the oven. I use my digital thermometer, something you should have, to make sure that it's around about the 170, 180 mark in Fahrenheit. I'll have to work that out in centigrade. And then I spray it with some distilled water. You don't need distilled water. If you've got a lot of chlorine or gunk in your water, you can put it in a glass for a while, half an hour, while it's baking, for instance, and that will allow some of the stuff to outgas. Anyway, put it into this spray thing, spray over the top of the bread, and put this back in without the top for another 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, test the temperature again. Temperature needs to be over 200, preferably over 203, but definitely not over 209. You can actually adjust the temperature. For the second 10 minutes of baking, turn the oven back to 400 or thereabouts. A little bit warmer than that if you like. And that should do you. All fairly straightforward. If you want to use seeds, you can. I usually use about 120 grams of seeds. You can actually use cheese as well. With cheese, what you do is after the second proof, before the first proof, you bash it out and you cut the cheese, preferably sharp cheddar, into little chunks about a centimetre at the most, square cubes. Spread them all over and then fold it over and incorporate them in nicely. Try to make sure they're in the middle and not close to the surface. You can also put stuff like a bit of rosemary in it. You can do it with ginger and orange peel, burnt orange peel, and a bit of honey if you like. By and large, don't use any sweetener, any sugars, because you don't need to. If you're going to do that, you may as well go to the shops and get your stuff down there. Anyway, there's plenty of things you can do with it. Have fun, no worries, ciao. I'll be going through this in a little bit more detail. It might be a bit confusing, so I thought I'd do this at the start, and I'll probably write a recipe out somewhere and take a photo. Ciao. I forgot to mention, this is what the bread looks like. So this is the seeded sourdough, and this is the slightly rosemary sourdough. This one, seeded one, is about a kilo, just under a kilo, because it's got seeds in, 120 grams, and this is 920. This has a bit more water in it, whey in it. Anyway, so no worries. Now it's time to have some toast and a cup of tea. Ciao.